Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November 7th meeting of Glendale's Charter Review Committee. Item number 1 is roll call. Committee members Durham.
Here.
Garibian. Smith.
Here.
Povolitis.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Manasarian. Harutunian.
Here.
Megardichian.
Present.
Karapetian. Yu.
Here.
Meek.
Here.
And Flower.
Here.
Thank you. Item 2, regular business agenda. Report of City Clerk reposting of agenda. The agenda for November 7th, 2024, special meeting of the Charter Review Committee was posted on November 5th, 2024 on bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item number 3, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. The committee may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The Charter Review Committee lead may refer the matter to staff for investigation and report. And committee members, we do not have any callers on the line. Okay. Item 4 is minutes. Could I get a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes of the regular Charter Review Committee meeting on October 3rd, 2024?
Unless there are any requested changes.
Move approval. I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call. Commissioner Durham,
Yes.
Garibian, Smith,
Yes.
Povolitis,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Manasarian, Harutunian,
Yes.
Megardichian,
Yes.
Karapetian, Yu,
Here.
Meek,
Here. Yes.
and Flower.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 5, reports, information only. Item 5A is an overview of Glendale City Charter.
Okay, good evening again. It's good to be here with you again. I know we promised that we were going to try to, on our end, limit the talking, but as part of this session, we wanted to give you an overview of the city charter. We kind of talked a little bit last time about what the role of a city charter is under the state constitution. Wanted to provide, and I will try to provide this at a very high level. I'm going to try to focus on the things that either are kind of already within the purview of the committee, meaning that the council's already asked for the committee to look at. And I'll also point out some things that make us different than either general law cities or other charter cities as applicable. So there's a few areas where I'll try to highlight those as well. I can't see the slide deck, so someone's got to pull it. If you can just go to the first, page 3, Greg. So, no, that's fine. So, no, you can go to the next one, actually. So the Article 3 really sets forth the powers that the city has as a municipality. And again, it refers initially to the state constitution, and really the charter is an authorizing document, but also a limiting document. And this, as a charter city, the cities have the powers granted to it under the state constitution. We talked about it a little bit. So the charter references that provision of the state constitution, and then the next provision, it also specifies 20 specific enumerated powers. This is a partial list that's here on the slide. Again, it ranges from providing utility services to our residents, leasing property, acquiring and constructing operating plants and parks and libraries and auditoriums and all the things that make us a city, the authority to levy taxes and issue debt, define what is a nuisance and authorize the city to abate nuisances and care for the indigent. And again, that's a partial list, but it's really an expansion of the authority that municipalities and charter cities have in general in a very, very clear way. Next slide, please. The next section, Article 4, then the next article, Charter 4, provides the list of officers, and if you had a chance to look through it, you'll see some officers that we don't really even have anymore. They're sort of outdated. Like we have an assessor and we have a controller. Those positions we don't really have. But there are obviously some key positions. The city council, which is currently elected at large, and you see I bolded that because obviously that's something that's going to be addressed by this committee, as well as an elected city clerk and an elected city treasurer. Some cities have appointed clerks and treasurers, or one or the other, but in Glendale, for almost 100 years, there are clerk and treasurer positions have been elected positions. We have appointed officers such as the city manager and city attorney, and as I noted there, if you look through that particular section, you'll see a number of titles. So that might be something down the road as we get through the work of the committee. You might want to we might want to look at and see whether or not we want to revise any of those. And then any other positions or officers or employees created by council ordinance. So whenever the city needs a new position, a new title, we go to council for the council to create that position. That flows from this particular provision of the charter, and then that the council uses its authority in that way. Article 3, another important provision of Article 4, Section 3, is the compensation of elected officers. So as a charter, general law cities generally are prescribed by how council members are paid. There's a provision of the government code which says, based on your population, the salary for council members shall be X, and the city council can adjust it on an annual basis by up to 5% or up to CPI, and amount not to exceed 10%. So charter cities are free to pay their council members differently, and we'll get into that discussion in more detail. But what we currently do in our charter is we basically incorporate those provisions of state law. So right now our council members are paid within what state law prescribes, and actually right now it's I don't want to say substantially lower, but it's quite a bit lower because the council has not at this time adjusted it pursuant to those state law provisions, while it waits the study of whether or not to do a different procedure, a different mechanism through the city charter process. And when under state law and also under our charter, when adjustments are made to council members' salaries, that salary adjustment cannot take effect until at least one council member starts a new term, or if the people vote for it. Next slide, please. So Article 4 also deals with the appointment and removal of department heads and other employees, officers, employees. And one area I'll point out is different than a lot of cities, at least what I've found, is that the city department heads, the individuals that run the departments of the city, are under the council manager form of government, are often they're appointed by the city manager. Some cities, maybe the fire chief, the police chief might be appointed by city council, but oftentimes they're at will and they're appointed by the city manager. Our charter has an additional provision that says those department heads are subject to civil service protections that are within the charter, and then also subject to the council approval. So I'm just pointing that out. That's something that makes us a little different, a little unique compared to a lot of other cities. And then all other employees are appointed by their department heads, and that is also subject to civil service, and in this case, the city manager, not the city council. Another provision authorizes provides that where a city officer is authorized to do something, a ministerial duty, then that duty may be delegated to another officer or employee of the city. Next slide, please. And by the way, if you have any questions while I'm going through this, feel free to interrupt. Otherwise, we can answer questions at the end as well.
Just one quick question, Mike, if you have a second. On the compensation, does the charter mimic state law, or is that an ordinance that mimics state law?
The charter amendment incorporates the state law by reference. And that was done in 2005. And the council has increased it, I think, 2 times in the 20 years since that has been on the books. So Article 5 deals with elections, and in large part, we follow state law. Under our charter actually incorporates the state election law, and now that basically most of the cities in the area are following the state election procedures. The county is running most of the city elections up until things get on the ballot, and then at that point, the Los Angeles County takes over. But our election dates are in the date of the statewide primary in even-numbered years. That's a relatively recent change that took effect. The first election that took place was in 2020. We used to have an April of odd-number years, and that was because of a state law, SB 415, the California Voting Participation Rights Act, which provided that if voter turnout was less than 25%, then a statewide primary or general election, then cities were required to change. And there were some legal issues with that, but the city, like most cities of our size, made that change in 2020. Our elections are, because they're the date of the statewide primary, when one year that election occurs in June, and 1 year that includes, 2 years later the election's in March, and that's just because the statewide primary, after we made this change, they decided to change the date of the statewide primary to have our primary elections in the presidential years in March, as you recall, just recently, if you recall, voting March. So that's why that is the case. Another provision, relatively recent provision, is there are term limits for council. That was adopted in 2017 and provides for a cap of 3 4-year terms for council members, and it applied to terms that commenced in April 2017. Next slide, please. So the legislative power of the city is vested in both the people and the council. So what that means is the council can adopt ordinances and resolutions, legislation, generally applicable rules that apply, our laws, our municipal code, for example. But the people, through the power of the initiative and the referendum, also have the power to enact legislation or repeal legislation that's been adopted by the council. This article, also addresses the frequency and location of meetings, and I highlighted location because that is one of the areas that the committee may be asked to look at. Right now, our charter provides that the council meetings have to occur in the council chambers unless there's an emergency or an earthquake, or for whatever reason the public can't access the building. And sometimes that's proven to be somewhat of an inconvenience. So that's something we may look at in the future. The Article 3, or Section 3 of Article 6 also deals with, also addresses voting. So it requires 3 affirmative votes of the council for certain actions. And then we have a very unique provision of our charter. Generally speaking, if there's a vote of the council and that vote is a tie, or anybody, then that action is failed. That's the rule in California. That's a fail. It doesn't pass. But in Glendale, many years ago, they included this provision that says any action where there's a tie vote, and that typically has to be 2-2, then it doesn't die. It comes on to the next meeting until the city council either breaks the tie or decide to take the matter off the agenda. And it's proven problematic in some cases. We'll get into that a little bit more when we actually bring the item back. But occasionally, like if the tie vote is because one council member is conflicted out, legally prohibited from participating, then it creates this issue. We've asked the Fair Political Practice Committee, what do you do in those circumstances? And they say, sorry. They throw up their hands and say, sorry, you can't use the rule that allows conflicted council members to participate when there's a conflict just to break a tie. So it's sometimes problematic. I wouldn't say it's the end of the world. We've dealt with it over time, but
How do you remove something from the agenda?
somebody will
Is
have
it-
somebody will have to
somebody
agree.
have to-
Somebody will have to agree to.
It's a separate motion, and then you
Correct.
they can vote on that.
Right.
Okay.
And then section 5 of this article deals with the selection and role of the appointed mayor. So right now, the council selects its mayor annually from among its 5 council members. And this provision addresses what the role of that appointed mayor is. If you read that, you'll see that it's mostly a ceremonial role besides running the meetings and having some control over timing of placement of matters on the agenda. Most of it is representing the city at ceremonial functions and whatnot. So as we discuss the potential for having a directly elected mayor, there will need to be some discussion of the role of that elected mayor when we get to it. Article 6 deals with the council's role, the council's authority. And, just highlighting some of the stuff that maybe is different than either state law or other cities. Our procedure for adopting urgency ordinances, there is a provision of state law that allows urgency adopted ordinance to be adopted as one in the same meeting under a provision of the government code. In our case, we still have to go through the 2-meeting process, although it will take effect immediately. That's one difference. Section 15, and I don't know that there's been a request by the council to look at changing this. I'm just pointing out something that's slightly different than some other jurisdictions. To sell real property, it takes 4 votes of the council. To lease property for more than 5 years, it requires an ordinance adopted by the council. And then to sell parkland that's either been dedicated or zoned special recreation, it requires a vote of the people if that land is more than 5 acres. The Section 19 of this article addresses the duties of the city clerk. I mean, you can take a look at that. It's just there. It explains what those roles are. Next slide, please. Thank you. Article 8 deals with the city attorney and the city attorney's office. You can see there some of the roles and duties of our office: defending, participating in litigation, providing written advice. We are under the administrative direction of the city manager, and what that means on all things non-legal. So if I have a budget issue, if I have an employment issue, those types of operational things, I still need to get the city manager's approval for that. One thing I'll point out right now, as a charter city, we could prosecute state misdemeanors, so meaning violations of the California Penal Code that are misdemeanors. We do not. It's not in our charter, and we have not done it. Our neighbors, for example, Burbank and Pasadena, do it. We don't have express authority to do that, and under the state law, you either need to have it in your charter or you need to have the DA approve it. Now, there's a new bill that would authorize cities to adopt an ordinance to do this, but this still may be something that comes back as part of your discussion, something the council was interested in discussing as part of this process. And then the appointment of my assistants and deputy city attorneys is subject to council approval. Next slide, and that's, I would say that's a little unique. Role of city manager, again, a couple of things that I think are worthy of pointing out. The city manager cannot be somebody who's a council member in the 2 years prior to the appointment. There is a residency requirement that's in our charter, but is not enforced because there's a superseding provision of the state constitution that does not allow that to be enforced. But you'll see it, and some people do occasionally raise it. 3 votes to appoint and remove, 5 votes to remove if it's within 135 days after a council election. And I think that the purpose there is to see if there is, if sometimes you have elections and sometimes there's a desire to make a change, and this is to allow to see if there's a cooling off period before any changes are made. And then the charter has some provisions related to the appointment of the assistant city manager, which is appointed by the city manager subject to the council approval, and the assistant city manager has the authority to act in the city manager's role when he or she is incapacitated. Next slide, please. So there's a whole section, there's a whole number of articles dealing with the city departments, you know, and they're all here. And it's very generic, it's not overly detailed. And so I would encourage you, when you have the opportunity, if you're curious, to go ahead and take a look at those, but I won't go into any more detail unless you have questions. Article 11, please, next section. So there is a whole article dealing with the fiscal administration, dealing with on the general fund budget side, and then the Glendale Water and Power side. We adopt a budget by July 1st. We're required to have a hearing. It takes 3 votes to approve any budget or any budget appropriation. There are certain provisions regarding taxes that are, in often cases, superseded by state law. But that's in there. Next slide, please. And then the charter has a rather detailed accounting and budget fund system in the charter. I'll get into a little bit. We tried to amend it a few years ago, and it didn't pass. But there's obviously the general budget fund, which is our general fund, which is the fund that pays for all of the day-to-day services of the city: police, fire, parks, libraries, anything that's paid for through general taxes, fines, fees, and levies, those sorts of things. That's retained in the general budget fund. The general reserve fund is basically the fund that, after the payment of all expenses, it's basically, I want to call it the savings account of the city, but that's used for, and it's maintained for the purpose of being able to pay for expenses not expected, and it's to say it's a rainy day fund, for lack of a better term. There are a number of funds related to the Glendale Water and Power. Just a couple worth highlighting. There's a water and electric revenue fund, this is the fund that runs the day-to-day operation of the utilities. It pays all the bills. The surplus fund, just like the reserve fund, is the fund that is used to and it's got some very arcane language. I'll say that, and we can get into that a little bit later if you want. But it is, at the end of the day, it's the fund that keeps all the receipts after the payment of all funds at the end of the budget year. We do have a general fund transfer, which you may have heard about. This is the provision of our state charter which authorizes the city, and in fact, the language in the charter provides that the city shall transfer 25% of operating revenue from the water and electric fund to the city at the end of the fiscal year. A couple things about that: it's never there's a caveat which says unless a lesser amount is necessary to preserve the finances of the utility. So that's been the MO for as long as I've been here. The highest it's ever been transferred one year was maybe 14. As a standard is about 10%. It is only from even though it is authorized to transfer funds from both the water and the electric, because of a state constitutional provision that was adopted in 1996, Proposition 218. We are not allowed to make a transfer from the water fund. We are still allowed to make the transfer from the electric fund. It was the subject of litigation. Happy to talk about that at a future discussion if you want, but we are continuing to be authorized to make that transfer in accordance with our charter. Questions on those? Next slide, please. So the city is authorized under the charter and also state law to regulate the use of land through our zoning power. There are some unique provisions unique to Glendale, though, just like many provisions of our charter. So zoning changes can be initiated by either the council or by petition of property owners. Changes to the zoning and development standards require a 4/5 vote of the council. And that, I would say, that's somewhat unique. And then whenever the owners of 20% or more of the frontage of property directly affected or immediately adjacent to the property, and that includes property behind, on the side, and across the street, whenever they submit a protest, the owner, and again, it's owners of 20% of the frontage, not necessarily 20% of the neighbors, then that particular zoning action will require a unanimous vote of the council. and it has been invoked from time to time. I think the last time may have been on the Americana project. And so that is something unique to Glendale. Next slide, please. So Article 23 has a number of miscellaneous provisions, a lot of them having to do with employee or public officer conduct related to conflicts, related to not paying for nominations or votes, not accepting things from anything of value from a candidate or applicant for employment, not favoring, not unlawfully or assisting or favoring bidders for city contracts, not approving, there's a provision about the willful approval or payment of unlawful demand from the Treasury would result in you losing your office. And again, there's a similar provision in state law, but there's a lot of overlap with state law here. In fact, there's one provision dealing with that I have marked here, no conflicts, that was really just incorporating Government Code Section 1090, which provides that no officer of a public agency can be financially interested in a contract that they have a role in making, meaning I, as the city attorney, if I had my own law firm, I don't, but if I did, I couldn't hire myself to do work for the city, which I think we all would agree that's a good rule to have. Those are some of the generic miscellaneous provisions. There's a number of them, and if you go through the charter and you have questions or you want to bring them up in this discussion as we go through this process, feel free to raise it. Next slide, please. And then there's two articles dealing with employees, one related to our civil service system. That will be an extensive discussion when we do. That is one thing the council has asked for the committee to look at, so there will be I anticipate a lengthy discussion, probably over a couple of meetings, but essentially, it's as I noted, it applies from all employees, from department heads down to entry-level employees. In fact, I think the only employees who are not subject to our civil service system are me, Mr. Tuktalian, and the city manager, and then the elected city clerk and city treasurer. So we'll get into that as well. Before we go into the next topic, I did want to talk a little bit about some of the recent charter amendments, those that were proposed and didn't pass, and those that were proposed and passed. But any questions kind of on that sort of discussion? There won't be a test, so, but I just wanted to provide kind of summary of what's these different provisions, how this charter was structured, and what some of the key provisions are that might differ from what we see in state law or some of our other neighboring jurisdictions. Anyone? Okay. What? Yeah, do you want to call 5B?
And just for the record, Commissioner Karpetian had joined the meeting during 5A. We are now at 5B, recent charter amendment history.
Okay. So there have been, as I mentioned, I think the last meeting, in 2005, the last time we had a charter review committee, there were a number of amendments that were, and I've covered them in the previous presentation. A lot of them, most of them were very minor, technical. Over the years, we've tried to make, the city council has proposed different charter amendments, and some of them have passed and some of them have not passed. If you can go to the next slide, please. So in 2013, the council proposed 3 charter amendments. One to convert the city treasurer position to an appointed position, and then one to, thank you. And then one, I went through some of the charter accounting provisions as it related to the general fund, the general reserve fund, and the Glendale Water and Power. Some of those accounting provisions are not necessarily consistent with what are called generally accepted accounting principles. And I'll give you one example. The charter requires us to make the transfer from the GWP reserve fund to the general reserve fund, and then to the general fund. And technically, I mean, from an accounting standpoint, you're paying from one saving account to another saving account. And what the accountants tell me is that you're not supposed to really do that. You're supposed to make transfers from operating accounts. So things like that, we were just trying to clean up. We were, there were some issues about whether we were complying with these provisions. There was actually litigation, and the ruling from one of those cases was that we were not following those accounting provisions. So what we do is we now follow the charter and we follow GAAP. It's a little bit more work, but we make it work. But anyway, so the idea was let's try to clean this up. And then there was some miscellaneous cleanup related to finance. We were required under the charter, for example, when we issue bonds, we're required to issue bids to seek companies to award, I don't want to call award the bids, to issue the bonds, including financial firms and those sorts of things. And actually, I think also to issue the company that's going to buy the bonds. And so that was sort of out of sorts with how other jurisdictions do it. Anyway, these three measures did not pass. I think there Measure A, the city treasurer, kind of drugged down the other items. And I would just point out to the committee that in the last 100 years, there have been a number of attempts, I think by my count, 4 attempts to make the city clerk position appointed, and 5 attempts to make the city treasurer position appointed, and they've all failed. I think generally speaking, voters do not like to they have an elected position, they don't want to make it appointed. That's long story short. But I'm just pointing that out to you because that was part of the discussion. In 2014, we had a provision to just clarify the filling of a vacancy and the completion of a term. We had a council member who became the treasurer, and so we had a vacancy. We filled it by appointment, which we were authorized to do by the charter. But the charter at the time required that position still be filled by special election within a year or something. I can't remember the exact language. And so as a result, when we filled the position in 2013, we were required to have a special election to fill it again in 2014. So we did that, and actually, Councilmember Devine, for those of you who know her, that's her first election where she was elected. But we also said, well, let's clean that up so next time when we appoint somebody, they can serve until the next election, if necessary. Council would always have the right to say, no, we want to call a special election, but that was another provision. Next slide, please.
Can I ask just a quick
Yeah.
question? Are the clerk and treasurer full-time positions?
Yes.
Okay.
So in 2015, and this kind of pertains a little bit to what we're going to be doing as part of this committee, there were 3 measures. Again, one dealing with the council compensation. The council put a charter amendment, proposed a charter amendment that would allow the council to establish compensation by ordinance. There was another measure to amend the charter to institute by district elections, subject to future voter approval of the actual districts. And just historically, and it's not a secret, we did a lot of cities at this time were receiving letters from law firms threatening litigation under the California Voting Rights Act, which is an act that says if you have racially polarized voting in your community, meaning members of a protected class are voting for their preferred candidates, and voters of the majority are voting for their preferred candidates in a statistically different, statistically meaningful way, and you have racially polarized voting, then you are required to go from at-large to districts. There's a lot of litigation around this, and when we talk about this, we can provide more information. In any event, and I can't get into the details of the threat that we received, other than we did receive the threat. The council did put this on the ballot and wanted to have a discussion with the community about what the districts would look like after that. And then eventually it did not pass. And then Measure E, again, we have the school board members were in our charter, and they wanted to do the same thing to institute by district elections. All 3 of these measures failed. But again, we are looking at 2 of these 3 items. The school board did ultimately go to districts. There was authority under state law to do it, even though it was in our charter.
Is it common that the school boards are covered by a city charter?
I don't think it's common, but it's not common, but it's not totally rare
Okay.
either. So it was just a weird historic relic of when we established our charter. We established the school district at the same time, and then at some point in time, they split off and obviously became their own entity. And then we talked about term limits that came in 2017, and that passed. So, and then next slide, the last one, just recently, earlier this year, Measure A amended the charter to give council authority to establish the complete procedure for the awarding of contracts. And there were provisions already in the charter at the time. And this one just will allow the council to establish the complete procedure. There were some limitations in the charter that sometimes were providing some challenges for the city in awarding contracts. And this will allow the city a little bit more flexibility going forward.
Has the ordinance been drafted for that, or is that still?
It's still in the works. So we have code provisions that are guiding our process currently, but we are updating it. And that was part of the desire of the council to update the ordinance to, in some cases, streamline it, other cases to provide some additional provisions related, for example, looking at the possibility of a local preference and those sorts of things. But it is in the works.
So it's going to be dealt with strictly within the ordinance?
Correct.
Doesn't affect the charter?
Correct. Okay, I don't have anything else on that particular item. Are there any questions about that? Now that you know that part, the recent changes as well as what's kind of in our charter, any questions on?
I kind of question, it's not really strictly related to what we just discussed, but is there a place where voters can go get more information about the measure that the city proposed for people to vote?
Glendale, GlendaleVote.net or GlendaleVote.org?
I'm going to look it up right now,
Yeah.
but I believe if you go on GlendaleVotes.org or GlendaleVote.org, there should be a historical section of
Yeah.
past elections where it'll talk about what was on the ballot and what the election results were. I'll double check for you.
Yeah.
I'm not asking about the results, but why the city proposed to people to vote on these measures? Why? The pros and cons. Why one should make a
Sure.
choice one
On
or
that,
the
on the
other?
historical website that Mr. Tatalian referred to, there's also the city attorney partial analysis for each measure, as well as the arguments in favor and against. So that information's all there. And if you have trouble finding it or finding any particular measure, let us know, and we'll pull it up.
Can you tell me the website address one more
Yes,
time?
it's Glendale Votes with an S at the end, .org.
Thank you.
And I will just add too, I think, on the district issue, because it came up in the context of the council discussing it in the past year. To the extent that there was a postmortem or kind of people asking what were the reasons it failed, and it's hard, we didn't do any sort of polling or anything like that, but there was a sense that one of the reasons it didn't pass was because it was just changing the charter, but people didn't know what the districts were going to look like, so they didn't know what they were voting for. So when we started the process on districts last year, that's why we were doing them together. We were asking the community to provide us input on council districts as well as on potential charter changes, so people will have an idea what those will look like.
Is the idea to put the actual district maps into the charter?
No.
Or so authorize them to be, correct?
Yeah. Right, it's required to be reviewed and revised after every federal census update. So if it were to be adopted in 2026, then we'd be looking after the 2030 census and looking at updating those maps.
Could I just add that those districts, whether you have 5 or 6, have to be population balanced, and that's why you would do it in accordance with the census.
Correct. Okay. Do you want to go to the next item? Yeah. That's okay. I mean, do you want to just oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, so the next item is just a timeline for the next few months of the work. And again, this is just something we're throwing out there. I think as you start to decide, and there's another agenda item, a future agenda item, so I think if you have thoughts on things that we put on the agenda for the future, That'll be part of that discussion as well. But we do think, obviously, the by-district elections and the concept of expanding the council and having a directly elected mayor, and then deciding what the role and duties of the mayors, those are all related topics. They all kind of work together, especially since the council is considering them together. And if the committee, for example, says, yeah, you should do districts, but we don't think you should do expand the council or directly elected mayor, then that's a separate. You're free to have those discussions, but those will all be related. So we do think that'll maybe take some time, and we want to provide you all the information that we had given to the council leading up to it. Greg did send you all the staff reports, all those staff reports, so you already have them, but we're happy to kind of go through them as we have this discussion. And we anticipate doing a little bit more information gathering for you, just to give you like what other cities have done and how it kind of works in tandem. But we do think that'll take, we will start that off in the first meeting in December, and then through the first quarter of next year. The discussion of the compensation and salary of council members either start at the end of the first quarter or the beginning of the second quarter. The civil service system discussion, there are a number of pieces to that, I think, that will probably generate some discussion. Right now, I'm looking at, I think it would take 2 meetings, but it could take more. It could take less, but I think 2 meetings at least, and depending on how you all feel about it and some of the issues, I could see it being more than 2 meetings. And for that one, we will have the staff from the Human Resources Department to provide you information, talk about the system, talk about how it works, so you get a sense of how it operates in conjunction with our Civil Service Commission, and talk about some of the changes that the council has proposed. I don't want to say they proposed, but the council has said we want to look at these things and get input from the committee on them. And then there are other miscellaneous or minor changes, some of the things I talked about, the location of the council meetings, urgency ordinances, some of the outdated language on some of the things. Those, again, I'm just throwing stuff out. And then, of course, obviously, as we get through this, if there are things that the committee wants to identify, then we'll have to have a discussion about that. And I do think we'll be circling back with council at some point to see to let them know where you're at as a committee, and see if there's any other issues they want you to look at before we finish up. So that's kind of where. Are there any comments on or questions on the timeline, or on the subject matter of the committee? There's another item to actually add stuff to the agenda or ask for things to be added to the agenda, and we can discuss that as well. But that's kind of where we're thinking some of these issues will play out in the next 6 months.
Will we be going through, like if I'm going through the charter itself and I see some things I want to bring up, that will come at the third quarter?
That's the thought right now, but I do think it would be beneficial as we either starting today or future meetings, as you're doing that review, bring them up as soon as possible. I mean, if the committee finds something on the thing in the charter that you would like to discuss, and we really don't start even knowing, if we don't know about it until the third quarter, and it's a big juicy topic, we want to make sure you have enough time to actually get to it. So as the earlier you bring information to us and let your fellow committee members know, the better.
So if we find something, we should just bring it up and say, hey, let's put this on the agenda for the next meeting or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a request with regard to the documents that we were referred to about the council's prior discussions. There was a lot. They were scattered in individual links. I had like 10 windows open,
Okay.
and I closed them all because I just contemplating how to download each one individually was going to take a lot of time. Is there any way we could get that somewhere consolidated?
Sure.
It would just be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions or comments?
if I, oh, go ahead.
What? Your mic's on. So, yeah, the question is to provide you information about what's going to be on the agenda. Sure, absolutely, and we'll do that. I mean, we're going to start putting the agenda together the next week. But I will say, the first meeting, we're going to get into these issues that are in the first bullet point. So we will, in addition to combining the documents, as Mr. Flower asked for, we'll send that out to you, so you'll have it all there. And that, all those staff reports deal with that first bullet point, so you'll have all that. And then those are, and then you can review those sections of the charter dealing with our at-large system. I mean, in reality, other than maybe the role of the city manager, these provisions they're not that much. It's really about going forward. What changes are we going to make? Where you're really going to, if the council expands the role of the mayor and makes it directly elected, that's going to be a more vigorous discussion, I think.
I had a question, this may be a broad topic, but how do we see this working? So if we want to talk about the duties of the mayor, is it open for discussion? Is there language that's drafted or a motion made? Or how does it, or what do we see a consensus looking like? What's the end product of our work and our review here?
That's a good question.
Because I think we established last meeting, it's not necessarily drafting language.
Yeah.
It's, if anything, providing direction, so that direction is provided in what form?
I don't know if you have any thoughts on. My thoughts are we'll initially get into the broad level discussion on some of these and provide you samples of what some of the cities said, but we will be seeking input from the committee. And if you're ready at the next meeting, for example, after you've reviewed it, if not, we come back and have another. You may say, hey, I want more information on how cities do it with the directly elected mayor and 6 council members, or because when you look at the report, for example, we said some don't have a directly elected mayor. Some do have a directly elected mayor, and he or she votes. Sometimes they don't vote. Sometimes they have a veto. So you may say, give us the samples of some of the cities that have this, so we can look at it and come back, and we'll bring you some information for that.
Yeah.
But and you'll have a chair at some point. So we will be seeking to get some motions to give a recommendation on making a change. And again, one of the options we'll present to you is what the council's already looked at, because the council had looked at it. There was some support for it. There was some, opposition to it. So one of the options you'll be seeing is what the council has already seen, just because they want your input on that part of it. But if you have other ideas on it, they want to hear that as well.
I guess what I'm trying to articulate is that discussion makes sense, the examples make sense. Ultimately, something has to be drafted that we, a consensus of some sort and a vote taken on it, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I can maybe try to answer this. We went through a similar effort about, a year and a half ago now with the Pension Review Committee. And ultimately, that was maybe an 11, 12-month effort. We had a number of technical speakers come in and make presentations. And ultimately, there was a set of recommendations that we had to present to the City Council from the committee itself. What worked very well was at the end of the session, we encapsulated all of the different discussions and the different recommendations that could be made, brought it back to the committee, and received some level of support to be able to articulate to council that on this particular issue there was discussion. There may not have been unanimous consent, but the majority of the group wanted to move forward with a recommendation related to this issue or that issue. I anticipate that's what we would do with this group as well. But even that's up for discussion. It really comes down to what the group ultimately feels is going to be best to form consensus for that document to be presented.
Because the sense I'm getting is there's actually quite a lot of stuff that requires a good deal of work. And given the cadence of, 1 month between meetings, honestly, I don't know if that's enough time to even get through the first quarter worth of stuff that's listed. So I'm just trying to think through the mechanics of how does this actually work, and what do we do to make sure it happens in a timely manner?
I think the other thing I would add then is it'll be a little bit of trial and error, right? We will present the information to you at the first meeting, and we'll see how the discussion goes, see if consensus, or if you want to get more information, and how to present that to you. And then as we start getting a little more familiar with how the committee is working, we'll have a better sense of what kind of information to provide to you in advance, whether we might need more than a monthly meeting as we get closer to the end, those sorts of things. So there will be some trial and error with that. But yeah, John's right. We'll ultimately, we could put together a package at the end of the process and say, hey, here's kind of where you're at. Are you okay with all these things?
Okay.
I want to, second the comments made about, making sure we understand the process going in, and if I might suggest, diving into the most politically charged topic right off the bat before we really have a sense of how we want to proceed might be throwing us in the deep end, so to speak. And I wonder if anybody else thinks there might be merit in taking a more discrete, one of these smaller issues just first, like the location issue. Seems fairly discrete. You all could describe to us what the processes are. We could figure out how we want to make a recommendation on that as a discrete thing and, get our sea legs, so to speak, before we dive into the, I know these are the probably the most significant political issues, but just in terms of getting ourselves organized. And it doesn't have to be the location issue, it's just that's been mentioned several times, and it does seem fairly discrete, so we could
We could
figure out how
certainly,
we-
if the committee agrees, we could certainly pick off a couple of the discrete items and bring them to you to kind of see your feel.
I would
And
agree
then,
with that also,
yeah.
just from the standpoint to let us get a sense of how we're going to work as a group.
Sure.
How we need to come to consensus, because I think you hit it right on the head. Ultimately, we're going to have to come to a consensus, or there's going to be a vote on an issue, whatever the recommendation of the committee is to go forward. And I'm kind of looking like the timeline might be optimistic, but
Yeah.
starting with the big one, or the, as I said, the most politically charged ones might be really difficult for us because we, as I said, getting our legs underneath us in terms of going, okay, we have a process that's going to work for us, and then we can figure out how to take a bite out of the bigger one and go, okay, how do we take this down to bite-sized
And I would-
chunks and get it done?
I'd second that. I'd say it's not even politically charged, put that aside. It's just a weighty topic with a
Yeah,
lot
it's-
of
There's a lot of history and.
a lot of information.
History,
A decade
expectations.
worth of history at least. I started, like you, I had probably a dozen windows open. I downloaded a bunch of PDFs. Like, the number of, the number of maps just made my head spin. And then I started asking myself, like, okay, why are we even doing this again? So I'm trying to wrap my head around the issue. So I agree with Carl and Commissioner Stephen, I think. Let's start with some training wheels,
Sure.
figure out how this is all gonna work, and then adjust.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, it's just as long as we don't put the stuff off too long.
No, but I think that gives us a chance to do process.
What's that? Yeah, I think they understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long, that it
Yeah.
gives, if we do something else, it gives us a chance to work out a process internally of going, okay, how's it gonna work in staff? Do we encapsulate it? What procedure are we gonna use? And then we get to the really weighty ones where there's gonna be a lot of information that we have to be able to digest
Yeah.
and be able to pull it all together. Then we have a working mechanism for us to be able to go, okay,
Yeah.
here's how we're going to deal with the issue, and take it a small bite at a time and get
I
it done.
strongly agree.
If I may add, sorry. So I partly agree with what everyone said. However, I think it would be easier to tackle more difficult topics early on because we can add to the frequency of our meetings earlier rather than later. And I would also recommend to give us the list of higher priority items that they need to be addressed at a certain deadline. However, we want to schedule the meetings. If it has to be twice a month, I would prefer doing that early on. That gives us more time to cover the rest of the topics rather than waiting for later.
I would say, I think in line with both of your comments, we start with some discrete, straightforward topics at the next meeting, and then we can see, after that meeting, see where you're at in terms of maybe bringing some of these other items to you. We'll work on that.
And I don't mind reading ahead if you wanted to get us some of those,
Right.
documents with the longer history ahead of time.
Absolutely. Do you,
If you make that available, we can start looking at it now instead of having to wait 2 days before a meeting.
Here. One question I have is on the district stuff and the, I guess on the district stuff, I know all those reports have all those maps. I mean, if you want, we can try to, because the maps themselves are not really before you, it's really the process. We'll try to see if we can cull those out and just have the staff, the main staff report, and I know one of the staff reports has an exhibit about how all the other cities deal with their directly elected mayor. Make sure you have that information, but keep the district stuff out, and hopefully that will help you guys as well.
I have a question just regarding the logistics. Is there a place, a common place that we could look to, for example, online for these documents, rather than having them emailed to us? Is there a site we could go into that's available? Are there resources for that? I'm not asking for funding, I'm just asking if, like each of these different documents could be there, if the charter could be there, if there's something that Greg needs to drop in about a previous council meeting, it could be there, just something that we could all log on to.
Yeah, we
Period.
can absolutely do that. We can create some sort of a Dropbox and have some categories in there to keep it a little bit more organized. Greg actually has quite a bit of experience with that, and he can speak to it, but that's absolutely something we could do before the next meeting.
Can I just ask other committee members if there's some sort of consensus that we're interested in that? Because I don't want to send people down a process if the majority aren't.
It would make it very easy for everyone to navigate through instead of going through the emails, so I fully agree with you. I don't know.
I mean, there's already the agenda center on the website. If everything was posted up
Yeah.
early enough, it's in the agenda packet. We
Right.
can easily get it. And you can even sign up for an alert that'll tell you when the agendas are uploaded. And so you can just then click on the link, it'll take you to where the agendas are, and you can download the whole packet. And if the packet's complete, then you've got all the documents.
And we will be working to get that agenda out to you earlier than we did today. Okay, any other questions on that part of the process? Thank you, I think that was a very good discussion. It will certainly help staff as well. All right.
Item 6, business and discussion items. Item 6A, selection of a chair.
So it was requested that this be brought back for potential discussion, and again, you can either make the decision to select a chair and then go forward with that, or you can, put it off until the next meeting. The reason why we had it structured this way today is we wanted to get through this part of it. But if the committee feels that you want to have a chair at this point, then I think the way to do it is have that discussion if you want to do it, and then somebody could start making nominations if you want.
I guess just a housekeeping question. Let's say we had a chair, is it Robert's rules type thing? And that's the process after a chair is selected?
Is
Do we
there a
have to even
default?
get that deep? What's that?
Yeah, is there a default in the city rules anywhere that it would be
Yeah, it's Robert's
Robert's?
rules. However, we're not like strict parliamentarians here, and we obviously will help whoever the chair is or navigate those issues. But that's generally how it would work. Making motions, seconds, that sort of. But we'll certainly help whoever the chair is. Just background: we've sometimes with a committee like this where it's a single subject, limited duration committee, we've had chairs, we've had facilitators. We did look at a facilitator to maybe help, and it was just we came to this arrangement. But at some point there will need to be somebody who's directing the meeting and directing the discussion, the debate, making rulings, that sort of thing. So it's up to the committee how you want to proceed at this point.
How was it done last time? I think someone in the room was here last time, and did it work well?
Lucy, do you remember, was there a chair for the Charter Review Committee? Oh, yeah. Former Mayor Eileen Gibbons was mayor last time. So, yeah, again.
If I might, I've thought about this, and it occurs to me along the lines of what we talked about in terms of process already, is that there will come a point where we're going to be voting on discrete issues about what to recommend. And at that point, there needs to be debate, there needs to be open discussion, but it needs to be orderly. And I think it's probably incumbent upon us to have a chair for that purpose. Whether or not we need that now, I don't know. I think having the staff facilitate has worked. But again, with the training wheels metaphor, acting as a chair, I mean, this is just something I've seen attending a lot of meetings in my professional life. It can take some time to get used to the role. And so if we select somebody now when the pressure is not on, by the time we're ready to start voting and we need somebody to actually kind of, make sure everybody's heard and make sure that the votes are taken in a orderly manner, I think if we give them some chance now to get used to the role, it'd be better. I guess, so to sum up, I just think eventually we will need a chair, and it would be fair to whoever that person is to get some experience early on.
I would recommend tabling this for the next session, just because I don't think we all know each other's working style enough to recommend someone. At least I don't know anyone here, so I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, and
recommend
I
someone.
wasn't necessarily suggesting we need to vote on a chair. I was just putting forth my view that I think we will need a chair.
Yes. I agree with that part.
I would also be okay with tabling it for the moment. I think the staff has gotten us this far. I'm literally of two minds because I think they can do a really good job of getting us through that. But I also know if we get into some more difficult or heated discussions and trying to make sure that everybody is in fact heard on doing that, that puts staff members, I think, in an uncomfortable position if at some point, because at some point we got to get down to a decision. And so we need to make sure everybody's heard, and then it's like, okay, the information's out there, and now we need to figure out where we are. Do we have consensus? Are we taking a vote and where we are? But so I think we might end up there, but I'm comfortable at least starting with this and giving us a little bit of a chance to get our training wheels in terms of getting some info, and then also, I think, getting to know each other a little bit so we can kind of see how this works out for us.
So,
I would go along with tabling it for this meeting and putting it on the agenda for the next meeting after we have our initial discussions about one of the topics.
okay, so we'll keep it on, unless there's any objection, we'll keep it on calendar full next week and make sure, do you have another discussion? I think
We might also even agree as a group that we're going to, instead of keep pushing it forward, we can agree that by February 2025, we're going to have a chair in place, or a by-when date if we want to. I am very comfortable with Robert's rules, and I like the order around Robert's rules, and I like the way a meeting's run. I'm not advocating at all to be chair at all. But having been on a state board for 10 years, I can see how effective they are, and I would like to see more of that kind of process in the city level. So it really is something that can be done and give us order, but I'm okay with waiting, just if we can agree by Q1 2025 as we get into this, that we might at least really get down to a decision.
Let's keep it on the agenda, and I'm leaning towards that. I think our next meeting oh, it's on. Oh, maybe I did, okay. Our next meeting, and then when we actually have a discussion, we'll definitely see the benefits of having a chairperson to herd the cattle.
Yeah, I think so. You want to make a motion? Yeah, yeah. Okay. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Any other comments on that? We're done.
Before we adjourn, I would definitely want
Oh,
to
yeah.
say, announce to everybody when our next meeting will be held. As a,
We still have one more item, I forgot, but,
Okay.
yeah, the next meeting will be on what day is that? This next item is future agendas? Sure.
Item 7, future agendas.
anything for, we kind of talked about what we're going to do for next week, but I mean, just in general, were there anything, topics that you want to at least have on the sort of, so that you're all aware and so we're aware that this is maybe something you want to look at, besides the topics we've identified, anything else that you saw that you might want to have a discussion about?
I like the idea of location of council meetings. That's something we could discuss at our next meeting. That's something that staff can provide us data on, and history, you know. Hopefully, there's not a encyclopedia of data on where to, so. That would be my vote.
Meets the definition of finite, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
And this isn't for the next meeting, but, and it's not the most exciting topic, I know, but re-looking at the cleanup on some of the financial language while we're doing this, and if we're going to do the charter amendments, it's like trying to get it modernized, not necessarily changing the intent of the charter, but at least getting the language modernized so it meets current accounting principles, and we don't have people going through different machinations to try and meet archaic language and modern needs, but just streamlining that. I think that's worth doing, and I think it would be relatively easy, or at least I'd like to hear what everybody has to say, whether we should do something with it. So I'll throw that out there for that Q3 cleanup stuff. And I may have one or two more coming down the line, but not yet.
Is there a chance we can have the detailed list of the topics that we are supposed to work on? We have an overview, but not everything is basically mentioned in detail.
We can
So-
certainly provide some. I mean, I think it was sort of covered in here, I think, and I did try to cover it the last presentation.
Right.
But we'll certainly send something out again and do that.
Thank you. And is there a way we could internally prioritize some of them that we're discussing?
Well, I
just
think
as
that
a-
was the discussion, like, let's have the meeting. The way I understood the discussion you just had was, we will have this discussion on a couple of the finite items.
All right, yeah.
And then at the next meeting, you can decide how you want to prioritize the remaining items.
Sure.
It might be useful to just have a running tally of the issues.
Yeah.
Just at the end of the agenda, and we can kind of have that. I've just seen this done in planning meetings where you have like pending products, you see what's coming down the pike, and you can, but in our case, we could also use that to kind of, at the end of the meeting, we were saying, asking for items for future agendas, see
Yeah.
what's left and put it in
Gotcha.
there.
We can do that.
Question for John. On the Blue Ribbon Pension Review Committee, were any of their recommendations implemented, or have any been implemented?
I'd have to go back and take a look at what the final set of recommendations was. Some of them, we received direction from council during last year's budget presentation or budget adoption process to go and pursue. One of them specifically had to do with going in and securing the validation for issuance of bonds. Not that we necessarily wanted to issue bonds, but you have to go through a fairly lengthy court process to get the validation done for the time that you want to issue bonds. Quite frankly, you issue bonds when the rates are good, but the rates have gone in the opposite direction. So that's definitely one where we did receive some direction from council recently. Do you recall any off the top of your head?
We'll probably follow up.
Yeah, I'd have to pull the final set of recommendations. Yeah. Appreciate you reminding me of the good old days.
I have another question, if I may. Regarding the agenda and council, does it make sense, or is there a place, how will council communicate to this committee? Is there going to be a report by staff? Is that going to be a standing item? Do they address it at the different council meetings? How often? Like, where are we getting our direction from them from?
I think the direction from them in establishing this committee and the conversation that we had earlier today in terms of some of the heavy meaty items that we're talking about getting into at some point is really the direction from council thus far. I think there's an interest in initially getting feedback from this group specific to those items, but the other portion of the direction or the expectation is that the group also take a look at the rest of the charter at some point over the course of this exercise and provide additional feedback that council themselves didn't direct us to review in detail. The way that I think the two-way communication is going to work is they've communicated to us what the expectation is. At some point, when we get a little bit down the road, I think we may want to think about maybe providing just a status update as an information-only item on the city council agenda, so we don't lose momentum with council as well. It becomes very difficult with an item this large to go away for a year and a half and then come back and say, aha, here you go. It's a lot to take in. And it would also show progress by doing that on an intermittent basis.
Yeah, I would say we do plan to check in, especially as we get through some of these items that they definitely said we want to look at, and we will be checking and say, hey, committee's made progress on these items. Those recommendations will be coming forward. Or is there anything else the council wants you to look at? And here are some of the things that the committee has said they want to look at as well, and that information will be really relayed back and forth. Any other questions on future agendas? Okay. Move for adjournment. And a second.
Okay, item 8, could I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion.
Thank you. Thank you. We are adjourned at 6:20 PM.